What's up, guys? So I understand that the title to this video is pretty arrogant. That was kind of my version of like posting a thumbnail to my YouTube videos with my mouth wide open, calling for 100K BTC tomorrow. So you got clickbaited, just so you know. If you thought you could click on this video and come dunk on me and call me an arrogant piece of shit, you're totally wrong. I am somewhat humble, right? I would like to think that I'm humble. And there's nothing but humility here. And I'm just a simple market participant, just like anybody else, right? But there's not to say that, there's not some truth to that sort of title. I was incredibly bearish at the bottom, and I did manage to perform pretty damn well for myself during this rally, right? Just like how I was incredibly bullish at the exact Pico top, right? And I managed to pretty much keep all of my gains essentially and compound those gains during these rallies in the meantime, right, including this one for the past year or so. Right, it's the same kind of mindset. So how was it that I was able to do this? Well, I didn't do that by calling bottom and calling for an echo bubble and trying to say why the generational bottom is in, or why this range is different than the range prior, which is was no different than the range prior to that, which was no different than the downtrend that we had coming into that range prior to that, right? I wasn't making those kinds of arguments. My point being is that I was never the guard dog that barked at the wind, right? When I bark, you had to hear my bark. I only barked 4 times, not including this time, right? Not including this time. 4 times in the past year. And if you ask yourself, okay, well, which 4 times? Go back to the weekly chart. And when you see price action that isn't headed to this bottom right corner, right? That's probably one of those times. So the 4 times where I flipped macro bullish on the market and started to entertain higher time frame arguments was here, right? So probably exactly what I just circled, the last half of that rally. I'm not catching bottoms. I'm not, a genius with a crystal ball, whatever. Here is where that uptrend actually starts to form, somewhere that in the middle of that candle. So I caught majority of that trend here, right? And right here. So this is really the only one that, like, I flipped bullish, and it's not even that significant in terms of we stopped doing something other than head to the bottom right corner, right? It was like, okay, we got like a week or two of uptrend. It was like 5 to maybe 7%. And then we just fully retraced it all in one candlestick thereafter, right? So I don't get to claim cloud on that one. But the point is, I'm not the guard dog that barks at the wind. That's the same mentality that had me refusing to short the rallies on the way up, right? Had me bullish at the Pico top so that I had the luxury of my form of coping was, oh man, my net worth when we're trading here is not as much as it was when we're trading here, even though I'm still up massively, right? That's my biggest issue. My biggest issue down here when we're pumping, right? When the rally is just starting to ramp up and accelerate, my biggest issue is, ah, man, I could have made more than what I actually made, right? It's not really that big of a deal. It's very, very simple. It's this mindset of just simply assume whatever the market is telling you to some degree. And as those assumptions start to scale up and counter argument, or like contradict whatever you are trying to interpret that the market is telling you start to lean against whatever the market is telling you. And you start to play into whatever the market's telling you at that moment instead, right? That's how I managed to find myself to be bullish, even though on a more macro sort of scale, we're absolutely still bearish during that price action, right? And point proven, we continue to downtrend. We're absolutely still bearish during this rally. Point proven, we continue to downtrend. We're still bearish during this rally. Point proven, we continue to downtrend or just simply go sideways, right? And the same time here, 5 or 7% rally, really not that significant. And, obviously it didn't work out that time, but it's the same mentality that allowed me to compound my gains this entire, past year, where the opportunity was not nearly as abundant as it was the year prior to that, right? So that's the idea. It is genuinely, I managed to outperform somebody who sold the exact Pico top, walked away for the rest of the year, came back and bought the exact Pico bottom. I outperformed that person with this sort of mindset. And so for the most recent rally, what you're actually here for, what I'm trying to get across is, and again, I don't want this to come off as, oh, I told you so, and here's me, tugging my own chain and self fellatio and whatever. I don't give a shit about that, right? My honest reasoning for making this video is to show a perspective so that hopefully you can start to adapt that perspective and implement it in your own form. And here's how I managed to likely outperform a lot of the people who have done nothing but call bottoms either the entire past year or more recently, right? Which are the same people who probably called, right? Most of those people who called bottom here are, again, probably the same people who called bottom all year. So again, obviously, there's those handful of people who have that higher degree of market experience and intuition, right, to otherworldly kind of extent, but I'm not one of those people, right? So how is it that someone like me comes in and outperforms? Take it step by step. What did I just say? Right? We go through, we scale our assumptions as price action starts to develop. It's that snowball to snowman way of thinking. So, really, the bullish arguments pile on pretty drastically when we do something like reclaim these 4-hour 200 moving averages. Now, obviously, price action at this point has moved so kind of parabolically away due to the context of the situation, trading in a 2 or 3% range for about 3 weeks. And prior to that, trading in like a 10% range for the majority of the past 2 months prior, right? So, because of that context, we've moved sort of exponentially, but that's not to say that this reclaim isn't any less significant than it is at that time. It's just as significant, right? So the bullish arguments start to pile on there. We reclaim these 4-hour 200s. At that point, you are already continuing an uptrend. When you go ask little Timmy, right, which way is this market headed? Little Timmy is going to tell you, the 4-year-old is going to tell you that it's headed to the top right corner. You just simply don't care about little Timmy's analysis because you understand that we're still stuck in this range, right? This 2 or 3% range. We're still below these range highs. We're still below the 4-hour 200s. We uptrended here, little Timmy. It didn't mean anything. We just continued ranging, right? So, how do I know that this uptrend is any different than the uptrend priors, right? During the range, intra range? How do I know that this time is significant? Because we're talking about a 2 or 3% move. So if 2 or 3% is something that you don't necessarily care about, then you're probably just going to write off little Timmy's analysis. But the idea is you understood that there was a snowball forming here, right? So when that snowball gets more snow packed onto it, all you have to do is exaggerate that analysis further. And I'm not saying that from here you should automatically expect 20K. How did you not see this coming? No, that's not the point. But that is to say that you start to entertain the argument to a higher extent because now the argument is a little bit more prevalent, right? So, with the argument that we already had, which was us uptrending intra range, along the 30-minute 200s, right? Now we've continued that argument. We're still uptrending along 30-minute 200s. We're still continuing this higher high, higher low market structure along the 4-hour chart. But now we're doing it above this supply zone, this range high, right? And above our 4-hour 200 moving averages, something that are, a key trend for Bitcoin historically. So we can expand our sort of anticipation for price action to whatever is next relevant, right? So that would mean what is the next most relevant resistance level? So to me, that meant that I was allowed to anticipate from here into here. Now, at this point, I'm not, just suddenly willing to refrain from bear posting on obscure timeframes and, claim that the altcoin led rally is just as, desperate as every single other rally prior. That's the same mindset that allowed me to thrive the entire past year. I'm still applying a winner's mindset. I'm just not applying it to the current relevant time frame, right? I'm talking about a much higher, a much more obscure kind of time frame. Maybe something like a couple weeks from now, maybe a couple months from now, whatever it may be. Those arguments will start to flourish again. I can come back and claim clout on them on Twitter, right? Just like we did back here, just like I did back here, right? And the one before that, and the one before that, and the one before that. But this time, those arguments hold off on becoming relevant, right? They never actually come into fruition. They kind of just stay in the back of my mind and then they never come to the front, right? Why? Because we continue to make them less and less sort of worthy of our attention right here and right now, with each and every addition of more snow being added on to the snowball. Now we're not just trading above the 4 hour 200s, above this range high, continuing this uptrend. Now we're trading above this range high as well, right? So that means that you are able to anticipate not just this move, right? Intra range, that's where the trend gets reclaimed, whatever. Oh my God, you missed out on that 2%. Okay, cool. No one cares about 2%. You reclaim 4 hour 200s, you continue that market structure, that uptrend, right? You break out of those range highs, you would anticipate expansion from those range highs. That means that you get to catch this 2% move, right? You're not the one coping complacent for that 2% move. Again, it's only 2%. Who the fuck cares, right? But then you break out of this 17.3, 17.4 resistance level, another range high, in my opinion. And from there, what's stopping you from heading here? And it's like, oh, well, thank you so much, Mercury. I'm so grateful for this very hindsight analysis. I literally posted a video the same day, right? The same morning, 12 hours before we did this, that says in that 2 minute video on Twitter, it quite literally says, hey, just so you know, above here, there's really not much stopping us from getting here. So I anticipate us to get here, right? That's the way that my mind works. Is that not the same exact system that allowed me to anticipate this rally into here when we're trading at 17.4? Is that not the same mentality that allowed me to anticipate this rally in the first place? It is. It's just that it wasn't as significant because we're talking about a 2% push. And prior to that, you're talking about another only 2% push, right? This time, the argument starts to become more relevant in the sense that it's a 7% push. So, yes, I'm not really willing to just throw all of my bearish biases that kept me sort of grounded for the entirety of the past year out the window just because of 2% pushes, right? It seems like I'm putting myself in a position where I start to acknowledge the bullish arguments to too high of an extent, and then we move a whopping 4%, and all of a sudden my bearish arguments become relevant again, say on a rejection and then loss of these 4 hour 200s. And now all of a sudden, right, when we're trading back here, I'm the one who is getting bullish on this 4% move. And we've already retraced 90% of that move, right, in like 1 day or so. But when those arguments continue, when they continue to pile on, when little Timmy only gets more and more conviction in the direction that this is headed, and he can start to attribute that very simple analysis within looking at the chart of 4 seconds, which way is the market headed, right? He can attribute that analysis to a higher time frame. As that starts to ramp up, your expectations sort of become more exaggerated, right? But it's not necessarily any sort of a different method that got you there in the first place. It's the same exact assumptions, and this is the same exact analysis that I gave last time as well. It was, hey, just so you know, now that we're trading above here, above this range high, above 4 hour 200s, market structure's bullish, blah, 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 yada, yada, right? Expect here because that's the next most relevant level on high time frames. And obviously, that's what we got. So from there, right, the idea was the people who are calling bottoms, getting over eager and very obsessed with trying to buy the bottom. By the time that the bottom is in, we actually start to move away from that local or even macro bottom, right? Or cyclical bottom, whatever it may be. Those are the same people who let their emotions get the best of them. Those are going to be the same people that let their emotions get the best of them on the way up, right? And as well as on any sort of pullbacks. So, just keeping that in mind, the context behind the situation, many succumb to their recency bias because of they're used to price action moving in a 2 or 3% range. They're used to price action moving in a 5 to 10% range for 2 months, right? Or they're used to price action moving towards the bottom right corner, right? So they're not used to this sort of volatility. They're not used to the extremity of trend. They're not used to breaking out of and reclaiming a very, very key level on high time frames on a low time frame, right? They're not used to us breaking out of these range lows and reclaiming them as support. And you can't even physically see the reclaim on this high of a time frame. We're talking about a 5 month long range low. We just said fuck you and we kept going, right? People are not going to be used to that. These are the same people who likely got overzealous trying to call bottoms, even if they caught it or not, right? So from there, when we're allowed to scale our assumptions and assume 18.5K, what do you think the mindset is? And from here, I like to attribute a sort of phrase, and it goes something along the lines of play it as such, right? So when you're looking at this chart, you understand that this is a 5 month long resistance level. It makes sense. It's logical to find some sort of trouble when we come into that region, right? At the same time, the mindset that allowed you the luxury of debating, is this a good take profit level? Should I capitulate all of my buys from the exact bottom? Should I add more, whatever, right? That same mindset, that luxury of the options that are available to you is not just suddenly gone. The arguments that allowed you to get there in the first place, to debate, do I want to take my profit or not? That just done it didn't just suddenly, evaporate just because we tapped 18.5. It's the same exact process. You scale your assumptions. You think about the context of the situation. What happens when we break out above 18.5? And if you've watched my video or the educational playlist enough, I would imagine that at this point, you probably understand that that would be a deviation back inside of this macro range, right? And what do deviations imply? Just like they implied this time around, just like they implied this time around as well, right? And they will always imply, generally speaking, they just simply imply a resumption of the norm, right? So a deviation, typically by definition, at least my definition, not the Webster's definition, right? But a deviation to me just simply means that you did something outside of the norm, only to resume the norm. And what would that mean if the norm in range trading is range lows go to mid range and range highs, and then mid range and range lows, and then mid range, range highs, and then mid range and range lows, and then mid range and range highs? So if we deviate back inside of the range and we resume the norm, what is the expectation? Range highs, mid range, range lows, mid range, range highs, mid range lows, mid range, right? You look for range highs. Once they're above that mid range, you look for those range highs. You didn't get it, cry about it, right? Cry about it for 15 minutes and then get the fuck over it and move on, and on to the next trade. But that is the implication. That is what you would typically assume once we deviate back inside of the range. If you watch my videos, you know this. So when we come up into 18.5, you have the exact same bullish arguments that allowed you to be bullish on the way up into 18.5. They didn't go away. At the same time, you understand that 18.5 is a massive resistance level. And it's possible that it could reject us or be this macro top, right? Or even just a local top, similar to how it was back here. So if you have both of those understandings, right? You're not just going to suddenly drop one or the other and only play one side. I would imagine that you play it as such, right? You understand that resistance is resistance, but at the same time, you understand that the trend is the trend. I would imagine you play it as such. So from there, when I'm taking profit at the range low resistance, right? My biggest regret at this point is maybe I took too much profit. But damn, thank God I didn't fucking capitulate at the range low after a 7% move. That's how I managed to outperform, right? It's this simple understanding of being able to scale assumptions and attribute relevancy as well as context to whatever's currently happening. And context, typically in markets, is going to get dictated by two things: volatility and time frames, right? That's how I like to think about it. So if we're in a very volatile range like this one, right? That's a context to that situation. And at the same time, oh, all right, sorry, my puppy was chewing on something she wasn't supposed to be chewing on. At the same time, time frame adds additional sort of layer to that context, right? We're in a 20% range, and that range has lasted for about 5 months. You would typically attribute that as a context to the situation. Once we break out of that range, you would anticipate a directionally proportional styled move to that, context of an extent, or that extent of the context. I don't know, but you know what I mean, right? When we break out of a 5 month long 20% range, you're typically going to assume a bigger sort of breakout than you would for a 2 day long 3% range, right? So when you have 2 months of typical just sideways, you have extreme volatility, lots of momentum, right? And you're talking about deviating back inside a very high time frame and very volatile 20% range. That is now the context of the situation. So if you have those understandings of resistance is still resistance, but the trend is still the trend, and in the event that the resistance breaks, right, I potentially miss out on the trend continuation back into 200 daily moving averages, range highs, or I'm sorry, mid range and range highs, right? Deviating back inside the range. That's what I potentially miss out on. A very sort of volatile move on a high time frame sort of context, right? At the same time, if I decide to not take profit when we come up into 18.5K. I'm betting on the trend. I put myself in a situation where I potentially give back a lot of my profit, right? Because my invalidation to that trend is still all the way down here, right? Because of the volatility, because of the time frame, the context of the situation. So I would imagine that when you have that balance of an understanding, you play it as such. So using that information, you can probably, be a detective and think about how exactly would Mercury have played this to have outperformed all the people that tried to call him an idiot when price was pumping to 18.5K, and I had literally told you the same exact morning that it was probably going to head to 18.5K, right? Yeah, obviously I'm not over it, right? But that point being, uh, look to be a winner, right? And this is the way that I played myself and allowed myself to be a winner, right? Or played my portfolio. I didn't play myself, right? You played yourself. No, I'm just kidding. Hopefully, you didn't play yourself. Hopefully, my analysis and the content that I'm providing is beneficial to you and allows you to sort of think of things in a different way, or hopefully, you manage to catch this move. Or I do have a thread on complacency, which is probably helpful to a lot of people right now. But yeah, I will look to continue providing content and hopefully value to each and every single one of you. If I even just manage to help one person, that means that I'm doing my job here, right? I literally don't see any form of benefit except for if one of you just so happens to be so kind enough to sign up to my Bybit referral link, which many of you do not do, if we're going to be honest, right? So that's totally fine, right? But just know I do kind of just do this just to do this. I enjoy this stuff. I enjoy sharing my perspective, and I'm quite literally working on a book, and I'm going to publish it for free sometime this year, hopefully. So lots to look forward to, and I still have lots in mind. I most definitely am not the person coping on the sidelines, complacent and down horrendous at the moment. If the market continues to go up, I continue to be rewarded. If the market pulls back, that means that I'm allowed to look for positions on derivatives. I don't currently have any derivatives trades open because the time frames that I would typically look to trade for this market on derivatives is not applicable at the moment because we're moving quite parabolically and quite exponentially. I do have some theories on that. I might share it. Mostly it has to stem around this graphic right here where we start to see a bit of a rotation. I don't know if I should get into that right now. The video's already probably dragging on way too long. I don't know how long it's going on right now, but we'll go ahead and wrap it up here, and maybe I'll keep that for another time. So I thank you guys as always. If you do find value in this stuff or my perspective, or just I made you laugh even once, consider signing up to my Bybit referral link. That is the best way to support me. Again, I don't see anything from these videos. Not many of you donate to me, so I mean that's the best way to support me. It's honestly the best way that I could find being ethical and trying to monetize my following to even some degree, because I've been using Bybit since 2019. So I truly do enjoy Bybit, and that's my home for the past few years. And maybe that can be your home too, just under my referral link, right? All right, guys. Much love. Take it easy, and have a good weekend.